1943, late night. Frank Sinatra gets a phone call. His manager sounds panicked. "Frank, you need to know something. Bing Crosby is trying to destroy you." Frank laughs. "What? Bing? We're friends. We're colleagues." The manager's voice is dead serious. "No, Frank. He's been calling radio stations, telling them not to book you. He's been talking to record labels, warning them you're difficult to work with. He's been spreading rumors, and it's working. You're being blacklisted, and Bing Crosby is the one doing it." That phone call revealed a secret war that had been raging for years, a war between America's two biggest stars, a war that nearly destroyed Frank Sinatra's career before it even began. This is the untold story of how Bing Crosby, the beloved crooner, tried to eliminate his only real competition, the story of a rivalry so deep, so calculated, so ruthless, that it nearly rewrote music history. And the most shocking part, the public never knew. Because Bing Crosby was too smart to fight in public, he fought in the shadows, and he almost won. To understand this war, you need to understand where it started. Bing Crosby was the undisputed king of American music. He'd been on top for nearly a decade. His radio show had the highest ratings. His records sold millions. His movies were box office gold. Bing Crosby was America, wholesome, smooth, untouchable, and then in 1940, a skinny kid from Hoboken showed up. Frank Sinatra, age 25, singing with Tommy Dorsey's orchestra. Nobody important, just another singer. Bing wasn't worried. He'd seen countless young singers come and go. They'd have a hit or two, then disappear. Frank would be no different. But Frank was different. By 1942, Frank Sinatra was a phenomenon. Teenage girls were screaming at his concerts, fainting, crying. They called themselves Bobby Soxers. The media called it Sinatramania. Frank's records were selling. His radio appearances were drawing huge audiences. And suddenly, Bing Crosby had competition, real competition, for the first time in his career. And Bing didn't like it, not one bit. See, Bing Crosby wasn't just competitive, he was ruthlessly competitive. He'd grown up poor, fought his way to the top, and believed the top only had room for one person, him. When other singers started to rise, Bing would quietly work to undermine them, not openly, never openly. But behind the scenes, Bing was a master manipulator. He had relationships with radio executives, record label owners, Hollywood producers, and he used those relationships to protect his position. If a young singer was getting too much attention, Bing would make a few calls. "I'm not sure he's ready for prime time, maybe give it some time." If a record label was considering signing someone, Bing would express concerns. "I've heard he's difficult to work with, might not be worth the headache." It was subtle, gentle, but effective, and for years it worked. Bing remained on top, unchallenged. But Frank Sinatra was different. Frank wasn't some flash-in-the-pan crooner. He had talent, real talent. He had charisma. He had ambition, and most importantly, he had a different audience. Bing's audience was adults, middle America, conservative, establishment. Frank's audience was young people, teenagers, the next generation, and that terrified Bing, because he realized Frank wasn't competing for his audience. Frank was creating a new audience, and that new audience would eventually replace Bing's audience, unless Bing stopped him. So in 1943, Bing launched his campaign. It started with radio. Bing called the heads of major radio networks, CBS, NBC. "I'm concerned about this Frank Sinatra situation," Bing would say. "The screaming teenagers, the hysteria. Is this really the image we want for American music?" The executives listened, because Bing Crosby was their biggest star. "I'm not saying don't book him," Bing continued, "but maybe limit his appearances. Keep him in check. Don't let him overshadow the more established artists." Translation: "Don't let him overshadow me." Some executives complied. Frank noticed his radio bookings were being reduced. Offers that seemed certain suddenly disappeared. He didn't understand why. Then Bing went after Frank's record deal. Columbia Records had signed Frank in 1943. Bing called the president of Columbia. "I hear you signed Sinatra. Interesting choice." There was a pause. Then Bing added, "You know he's very young, very inexperienced. I hope you're prepared for the challenges that come with managing someone like that." "What do you mean, Bing?" "I mean he might be difficult, demanding. These young singers with sudden fame often are. I'd hate to see Columbia have problems." The message was clear. Frank Sinatra is trouble. Be careful. Columbia started treating Frank differently. They became more controlling, more demanding, gave him less creative freedom. Frank felt the pressure but didn't know where it was coming from. Next, Bing targeted Frank's Hollywood opportunities. Frank wanted to break into movies. He'd had a few small roles, but he wanted more. Bing called studio executives at MGM and Paramount. "I heard you're considering Sinatra for some pictures. Can he act? Singing is one thing, but acting is different. I'd hate to see you invest in someone who isn't ready." The studios hesitated. Frank's movie opportunities slowed down. Roles he was promised went to other performers. Frank was frustrated, but he still didn't know why doors were closing. The most damaging thing Bing did was spread rumors about Frank's personality. At industry parties, at golf clubs, at private dinners, Bing would casually mention Frank. "Talented kid, but I've heard he's got a temper, difficult to work with, arrogant." None of this was based on fact. Frank in the early 1940s was actually humble and eager to please, but Bing's reputation carried weight. When Bing Crosby said something, people believed it, and slowly a narrative formed. Frank Sinatra is talented but problematic. By 1944, Frank was sensing something was wrong. His career was still successful, but it wasn't growing as fast as it should. Radio bookings were limited. Record label support was lukewarm. Movie roles weren't coming. And then he got that phone call. His manager, a man named Nicholas Savano, had heard the rumors. He'd talked to people in the industry, and he'd pieced it together. "Frank, Bing Crosby is working against you." Frank didn't believe it at first. "Bing? Why would Bing care about me? He's Bing Crosby. He's got nothing to worry about." "That's exactly why he's worried, Frank. You're the first person who's threatened his throne, and he's trying to protect it." Frank asked around, quietly, carefully, and he heard stories. A radio executive mentioned that Bing had expressed concerns. A record producer said Bing had raised questions about Frank's reliability. A studio head admitted that Bing had suggested Frank wasn't ready for leading roles. Frank was furious, but he was also smart. He realized he couldn't fight Bing openly. Bing was too powerful, too beloved. If Frank accused Bing publicly, nobody would believe him. Frank would look paranoid, bitter, ungrateful. So Frank decided to fight back differently. He would outwork Bing, outperform Bing, become so undeniable that Bing's sabotage wouldn't matter. Frank pushed harder. More concerts, more radio appearances, better performances. He improved his acting, studied film, took vocal lessons to refine his technique, and it worked. By 1946, Frank was one of the biggest stars in America, right alongside Bing. The public saw them as friendly rivals, two great singers, different styles, both wonderful, but behind the scenes, the war continued. In 1946, Bing tried a new tactic. He started positioning himself as the mature alternative to Frank. In interviews, Bing would subtly criticize the hysteria around young performers. "Music should be about the song, not screaming fans," Bing would say. "I prefer a more dignified approach." He never named Frank directly, but everyone knew who he meant. Bing also used his influence to keep Frank out of certain venues, the most prestigious concert halls, the most important radio shows. Bing would call the organizers. "I'd love to perform at your venue, although I understand you're also considering some newer performers. I prefer venues that maintain a certain standard." Translation: "It's me or Frank. Choose." Some venues chose Bing, others chose Frank, but the division was clear. Hollywood insiders started noticing. Dean Martin, who would later become one of Frank's best friends, remembered. Everyone knew Bing and Frank didn't like each other, but nobody talked about it. Bing was too powerful. "You didn't cross Bing Crosby." Rosemary Clooney, who worked with both men, said, "Bing never said a bad word about Frank in public. He was too smart for that. But privately, he made it very clear he saw Frank as a threat." 1947, and Bing was getting desperate. He tried to undermine Frank's recording sessions. Bing had friends at Columbia Records. He'd call them. "How are Frank's sessions going? Is he hitting his deadlines? Being cooperative with the arrangers?" These questions planted seeds of doubt, made Columbia executives scrutinize Frank more closely, watch for any sign of difficult behavior. Frank felt the pressure. He started clashing with Columbia executives, not because he was difficult, but because he felt they were treating him unfairly. And those clashes, they confirmed the narrative Bing had been planting. "See, I told you Frank was trouble." Then came the biggest battle, Going My Way. 1944, Bing Crosby starred in Going My Way, playing a charming priest. The movie was a massive hit. Bing won the Academy Award for Best Actor. The film made him even more beloved, America's sweetheart. Now Frank wanted to do something similar, a prestige picture that showed his acting range. He found a property, The Miracle of the Bells, a drama about faith and redemption. Frank was excited, but when the studio announced Frank for the lead, they got a call from Bing Crosby's representatives. Mr. Crosby is concerned about the subject matter. Religious films are very delicate. They require a certain gravitas, a certain maturity. Mr. Crosby hopes the studio has considered whether Mr. Sinatra is the right choice for such important material. The studio hesitated. They asked Frank to do extra screen tests, brought in other actors to audition. Eventually, Frank got the role, but the damage was done. The studio's lack of confidence showed. The film underperformed at the box office, partly because the studio didn't promote it aggressively. And Bing, he told friends, "I tried to warn them. Frank's not ready for that kind of role." But then came 1949, and everything changed. Frank's personal life exploded in scandal. His affair with Ava Gardner became public. His marriage to Nancy fell apart. The press turned on him. His wholesome image was destroyed, and his career began to crumble. Radio bookings disappeared. Record sales dropped. Movie offers stopped. By 1950, Frank Sinatra was in free fall. Columbia Records dropped him. MCA, his agency, dropped him. Hollywood wanted nothing to do with him. Frank was broke, depressed and desperate, and Bing Crosby watched it all happen. Did Bing cause Frank's collapse? No. Frank's personal decisions caused that. But did Bing do anything to help? No. Did he use his influence to give Frank a second chance? No. Did he call anyone and say, "Frank's going through a tough time, let's support him"? No. Instead, Bing stayed silent. And in Hollywood, silence from someone as powerful as Bing Crosby was its own form of sabotage. In 1952, Frank was at rock bottom. He needed a new record deal. Capitol Records was interested but offering terrible terms. Frank's lawyer called everyone, begging for help. He even called Bing's manager. Could Bing put in a good word for Frank at Capitol? They both record there. It would mean everything. Bing's manager called back. Bing says he doesn't want to get involved in Frank's business matters. He wishes Frank the best but can't help. That can't help was actually won't help, because Bing absolutely could have helped. One phone call from Bing Crosby to Capitol Records, saying Frank's a good guy, you should treat him fairly, would have changed everything. But Bing didn't make that call. Frank signed with Capitol on humiliating terms, tiny advance, no control. It was the lowest point of his career. But then something remarkable happened. Frank fought back. He got a role in From Here to Eternity by begging, pleading, and accepting scale wage. His performance was brilliant. He won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. His Capitol recordings, starting with Songs for Young Lovers and In the Wee Small Hours, were revolutionary. Critics loved them. Suddenly, Frank Sinatra was back, bigger than ever, and Bing Crosby couldn't believe it. March 25, 1954. The Academy Awards. Frank wins Best Supporting Actor. The crowd erupts. Frank is crying, grateful, humble. The camera pans across the audience. Everyone is applauding. Everyone except Bing Crosby. Bing sits there, arms crossed, face expressionless, no smile, no applause, stone cold. People noticed, journalists noticed, Frank noticed. After the ceremony, backstage, Frank is surrounded by well-wishers. Bing walks past, doesn't stop, doesn't say congratulations, just walks past like Frank doesn't exist. Frank told his daughter Nancy years later, "That night, I knew. Bing never wanted me to succeed. He wanted me to disappear. And when I came back, he couldn't hide his disappointment." 1954, 1960. Frank's career exploded. He became bigger than Bing had ever been. More albums, better movies, more influence. Frank formed his own record label, launched the Rat Pack, became a cultural icon. And Bing's career was slowing down. He was still successful, still beloved, but he was no longer the biggest star in music. Frank was. The roles reversed. Now Bing was the older generation. Frank was the new king, and Frank didn't forget what Bing had done. In 1955, Capitol Records wanted to do a duet album, Bing and Frank together. It would have been the biggest album of the decade. Capitol approached Frank. Frank said no. "Why not?" Capitol asked. "It would be huge." Frank's answer was simple: "I don't trust him." Capitol asked Bing. Bing said, "I'd be happy to work with Frank, if he's interested." But Frank never was. In interviews, when asked about Bing, Frank was always diplomatic. "Bing's a great talent, an icon. I learned a lot from listening to his records." But privately, Frank told friends, "Bing tried to destroy me. He almost succeeded. I'll be professional with him in public, but I'll never forget what he did." 1960, Hollywood party. Frank decides to confront Bing. He walks up. "Bing, we need to talk." Bing smiles. "Sure, Frank, what's on your mind? Did you try to blackball me in the 1940s? Did you call radio stations and labels and tell them not to work with me?" Bing's smile doesn't fade. "Frank, I don't know what you're talking about. I've always respected your talent. That's not what I asked." "Frank, you're being paranoid. Maybe you've listened to too many rumors." Frank stares at him. "I know what you did, Bing, and I want you to know, you failed." Bing finally drops the smile. I have no idea what you're referring to, but I'm glad your career worked out. You've done very well for yourself. No thanks to you. Frank, if you have something specific to accuse me of, go ahead, otherwise this conversation is over. Frank realized he had no proof, just stories, rumors, circumstantial evidence. Bing was too smart to leave fingerprints, so Frank nodded. You're right, this conversation is over, and he walked away. That was the last real conversation they ever had. For the next 17 years, until Bing died in 1977, they maintained a cold, professional distance. They'd see each other at industry events, they'd nod, they'd exchange pleasantries, but there was no warmth, no friendship, just icy politeness. When Bing died in 1977, Frank was asked to comment. Frank's statement was carefully worded. Bing Crosby was one of the greatest entertainers of the 20th century. His contributions to music and film are immeasurable. He will be missed. Notice what Frank didn't say. He was a good friend. He was a good man. I'll miss him personally. Just professional respect. Nothing personal. Years later, Frank's daughter Tina wrote a biography of her father. In it, she included this. Dad always believed Bing tried to sabotage his career in the 1940s. He never had absolute proof, but the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. And Dad never forgot. He forgave a lot of people in his life, but he never forgave Bing. So was Frank right? Did Bing really try to destroy him? The evidence suggests yes. Multiple sources from that era confirmed that Bing made calls to radio stations, record labels and studios expressing concerns about Frank. Bing's friends admitted he saw Frank as a threat. Bing's actions during Frank's lowest point, his refusal to help, his cold reaction to Frank's comeback, all suggest a deep animosity. But here's the complicated part. Bing never saw it as sabotage. In Bing's mind, he was just maintaining standards and protecting his business interests. He probably believed he had legitimate concerns about Frank's inexperience and the hysteria around him. Bing didn't think he was being cruel. He thought he was being strategic. But intention doesn't change impact. Bing's strategy nearly destroyed Frank's career, and Frank knew it. This is the untold story of Hollywood's greatest rivalry. Not Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. Not Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. Bing Crosby and Frank Sinatra. Two giants, two legends, one secret war. The war was fought in whispers and phone calls, in boardrooms and country clubs, in tiny acts of sabotage disguised as concern. And the public never knew, because both men were too smart to fight openly. Bing protected his image as America's wholesome crooner. Frank protected his image as the scrappy kid from Hoboken. But behind the scenes, they hated each other, and that hate shaped both their careers. Bing's attempt to destroy Frank ultimately failed. Frank not only survived but surpassed Bing. But the effort took its toll. Frank became harder, more suspicious, more ruthless in his own dealings. He learned from Bing. In Hollywood, nice guys finish last. You protect what's yours. You eliminate threats. You fight in the shadows. And maybe that's Bing's real legacy in this story. He didn't destroy Frank, but he taught Frank how to fight. And Frank became a better fighter than Bing ever was. Today, when people think of Bing Crosby, they think of White Christmas, the warm voice, the gentle smile, America's favorite crooner. They don't think of the ruthless competitor who tried to end Frank Sinatra's career before it began. But Frank remembered, always, and in the end, Frank won. Not because he was more talented, both men were geniuses. Frank won because he survived what Bing threw at him. And survival, in Hollywood's secret wars, is the ultimate victory.